Hi, welcome to the Joyful House and welcome to Craft Table Talks. My name is Cynthia with Cynthia's Joyful Creations, and I'm glad you're here. Week after week, we are going to learn and explore new things in the craft of crocheting and knitting. I encourage you to ask questions or suggest topics that you would like to discuss or research further. Our time here around the craft table, it is for everyone, beginners and seasoned crafters. I am dedicating this time around the craft table to my sister Missy, who let me know that she was interested in learning how to crochet and knit. So I thank her for inspiring me to share what I can and bring some yarny inspiration and joy to you and all those who want to learn and refresh. So if you're ready, come join me for today's craft table talks. Hello, welcome to the Joyful House and welcome to today's episode of Craft Table Talks. My name is Cynthia with Cynthia's Joyful Creations, and I'm excited to spend some time with you around the craft table today. Today is Craft Table Talks number 11, and our table topic today is how do I make a dishcloth with single crochet stitches? Well, before we get started, I would like to invite you to join me as we go over the outline of everything that we will be talking about in today's episode together. So if you will, look on your screen. I have a copy of the outline there for you. And let's go over our topics for today. Our table topic is, how do I make a dishcloth with single crochet stitches? Next, we're going to look at what do I need for today's project. And then we're going to head over to the craft table. That's where the magic happens. And we are going to make our single crochet dishcloth. Then we're going to talk about how to recognize the front and back side of your work. It's also referred to as the right side and the wrong side. And when we're done, whether using a tool or by sight, you will be able to recognize the front and back side of your work. And then we're going to look at how to weave in the ends. That way your project will be completely finished. It will be ready for you to gift to someone or take and dive right into your own kitchen sink and begin washing dishes with your brand new dishcloth. And then finally today we'll wrap it up with table chatter. And this is a way for you to engage with me from today's episode. I always look forward to reading everyone's responses, so I can't wait to see what your comment will be from today's table chatter. So I encourage you to participate in that. All right, well, if you're ready, then let's talk about what do I need for today's project. Now, if you're just going to make this just to practice, you can use cotton or acrylic yarn. But if you are truly going to make it and possibly gift it to someone or use it in your very own kitchen, then I highly recommend that you use yarn that is 100% cotton. And the reason that is because cotton is a lot more durable and it will hold up, especially with wash after wash. Not only that, the cotton yarn can sustain the heat a little bit better, and so that way if it gets used in the hot water or the cold water, it will stand up and withhold itself for washing your dishes, even your most dirtiest dishes. Today I am using Crafter Secret cotton. It is a Hobby Lobby yarn, and as you can see, it is $2.99 a skein. And today I am using the color Periwinkle. And you can see it's a nice, pretty, soft blue. I chose this solid color so that you would be able to see the stitches a lot easier as we make our dishcloth. So that will help you be able to watch easier what I'm doing. Now, when it comes to the hook and dishcloths, I normally use a 5mm hook, which is known as a H hook. But today I'm going to use a 6mm hook, and it is a J hook, And the reason I'm going to use one with a much bigger head on the end is so that as I make the stitches, you can see exactly what I'm doing, where I'm going in, how I'm chaining, and all those different things that we'll be doing. And that way you'll be able to see them easier because the stitches will be larger. Then you'll also need a pair of scissors for cutting your yarn, and you will also need a darning needle for weaving in your ends, and it has the little bent tip. And then I also encourage you to have some stitch markers, at least 3, and they can be any kind of stitch markers. I'm going to be using this one today, and I'm also going to be using these 2. Now your stitch markers can be identical. They don't have to be different like mine. You can even use a piece of yarn scrap, or you can use a paper clip. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, but just something that you'll be able to mark your project with so you'll know the beginning and the ends and the front and the back side. All right, if you're ready, let's head over to the craft table and let the magic begin. So I'll see you at the craft table. Welcome to the craft table. This is where the magic is going to happen today. We are getting ready to start by creating a slip knot and creating our chain. If you're not familiar with how to make a slip knot or a chain, then I encourage you to pause this video and refer back to Craft Table Talks episode 4, and that will show you step by step how to make that slip knot and how to create the chain as well. So let's go ahead and create our slip knot, and you can do whichever way is the most comfortable for you. And again, I just like to take mine, cross it over my finger, and then just slip it through and pull it tight. Again, I know I did that part very quickly. Again, if you need a little bit of help with that, you can always refer back to episode number 4. And then we're going to put it on our hook. And just a quick reminder, this loop does not count as a chain or a stitch ever. It is just the loop on the hook. Now, a lot of different crochet patterns will encourage you to chain either 25, sometimes 30 to 35 chains for a dishcloth. In my personal experience, and I've been crocheting and making dishcloths for 21 years, I've come to learn that more people prefer a dishcloth when it is a little bit more on the smaller side and they can hold it a lot easier. So for today, we are going to chain 21 chains. Again, this one on the hook does not count. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and 21. We now have a chain of 21 chains. If you'll remember, we talked about in one of our other episodes, when we talked about the single crochet stitch in episode 6, that you need to always chain 1 as your turning chain. So we're going to skip this very first chain from the hook and use that as our turning chain, and we're going to start our single crochet in the second chain from the hook. All right, so to do that single crochet, you're just going to insert into the stitch. Now, because I do plan on putting a border on this dishcloth, I like to go under just that top loop and save the other 2 loops on the bottom so I have something to work with when I make that border. But if you're more comfortable going under the top 2 loops, you can do that. So to make your single crochet stitch, after you insert it into the chain, yarn over from back to front and turn your hook counterclockwise and pull that loop through the chain. You have 2 loops on the hook, yarn over and pull through both. And again, if you need a little bit of help and practice with how to make the single crochet stitch, you can refer back to Craft Table Talks episode 6. All right, we're going to make another single crochet. So we're going to insert into that next stitch, yarn over, pull up that loop, 2 loops on the hook, yarn over and pull through both. All right, and we're going to do a single crochet in the next, and then we're going to do a single crochet in every stitch down the row. And because we skipped that first chain to use as a turning chain, that means we will make single crochets in 20 chains. So when we get to the end here, we should have a total of 20 single crochets. And when we get to the end, we will stop and we'll count them. And that's a tip that I can give you, that no matter what you're doing, always count your stitches at the end of each row or round, and we'll talk about rounds in a future Craft Table Talks. Today we're going to be working in rows, but I always encourage you, especially if it's important that the project you're making needs to maintain a certain amount of stitches, then you definitely always want to stop and count before moving on to make sure that you have all of your stitches. And I'll show you in just a minute when we get to the end. And of course, we talked about this in Craft Table Talks number 6, that sometimes it's hard to identify that last chain or the last stitch of a row. And that's where our stitch markers that I asked you to bring today are going to come into play. That will help you out. So again, we're just working down our row and creating those single crochet stitches. You can see that this large crochet hook number 6 is creating these stitches really big, so you can see some space in between those stitches, and that is okay. There's nothing wrong with that. And you can really use any size hook that you want for these dishcloths. And of course, the larger the hook, the bigger the stitches, and they'll work up faster. But if you're wanting something to give you a really good scrub on your dishes, then that's why I recommend using that 5mm. All right, I'm at the last chain before the slip knot, and remember, the slip knot itself does not count as a chain or a stitch. So I'm going to work right into this last chain and finish off with that single crochet. And now let's stop a minute, and I'm going to pull this out a minute. Let's stop and count our stitches. Now, you can either look at each stitch and count it, because you can see it creates this kind of V in the front. You can turn it and look at the V's going across the top here. So however you want to do it. All right. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19 single crochets that we made. And then if you come back and count your turning chain, that gives you stitch number 20. So here we go again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and then 19 and 20. All right, so now we're ready to begin row 2. And to do that, you're going to chain 1, and that gives you your row height. And now you're going to turn your work. Turn your work towards you, and now we're ready to begin row 2. All right. I like to work my stitches in each stitch, and the way I've described it before, as we learned how to do the single crochet, the half double, the double, and the triple in episodes 6, 7, 8, and 9. I describe this as each stitch is a home, and you want to put a family in each home. Now, you can chain 1 and say, well, that home already has a family, and go to the next. But as I shared in those episodes 6, 7, 8, and 9, when you do that, it creates a big space, which is like a big hole in your project. So I like to use my turning chain as a height, but not count it as a stitch like we did in the beginning when we skipped this first chain to create the turning chain. So to not count it means I have to put a family in this home. So I'm going to go right in here and make a single crochet. And you want to make sure you're going under both loops. It creates a V on your hook when you do. And then just yarn over, pull that loop through, 2 loops on the hook, yarn over and pull through both, and you've created that single crochet, and you've put a family into that home. We're going to go into the next home and bring in another single crochet family, and we're going to do that in every stitch down the row. Now I am moving a little bit fast, and that's because we've already had a craft table talks on single crochet stitches where we learned how to make them. So again, if you need a little bit more help with that, then pause this video and go back to Craft Table Talks episode number 6, where we spend a lot of time learning how to make those single crochet stitches. But right now, it's kind of like taking the test after the class. So you're just going to keep making single crochet stitches in each stitch as you go down the row. Also a reminder, when you're first getting started, even though you're working, from one end to the other, side by side, parallel, sometimes it feels like you're working more in a vertical than a horizontal, and it's just because you don't have anything to hold on to. But the more you do, and the more you have to hold on to, you'll be able to hold your project horizontally and make those stitches a lot easier. So again, we're just working down row 2 here, making single crochet stitches. And when you get to the last one, we're going to stop and work it together. And I'm at the last one. Now sometimes it's hard to see that last stitch, so you might feel like you're finished and skip that altogether. This is also why it's important that you count your stitches. But I can tell you there is one more stitch there, and this is where we skipped that chain at the beginning and made that first stitch. So it does look kind of a little wonky and different, but you want to make sure you grab it, and you want to make sure you go under both loops like you've done with all the other stitches on the row. So go ahead and complete that single crochet. And now this is where your stitch markers are going to start coming into play. So to help you out and make sure you don't miss any stitches, let's put a stitch marker in this very last stitch. All right, now before we go forward, let's take a moment and count and make sure we have our 20 single crochet stitches. So here's number 1, here's number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and our stitch marker is in number 20. All right, we are ready to leave row 2 and head to row 3. To do that, we need to increase the height for the next row. So we're going to chain 1 and turn our work towards us. And now we're ready to start row 3. Now I have this stitch marker in this stitch, so I'm going to remove it so I can work right into that stitch and make my single crochet. And when I'm finished, I'm going to put my stitch marker right back into that stitch, so when I get to the end of row 4, I will know that that's the last stitch. All right, now before we move on, I want to talk about how to mark, not identify, we're going to do that once we finish, but how to mark the right side, the front side of my work, especially if I am new to crochet, new to the single crochet stitch, and I'm not sure how to do that. Well, first off, whenever you start a project and you're going from row to row, from end to end horizontally, you have your slip knot and you create your chain. That is your foundation row. Okay? All right. Then when you make your first row of single crochets back, that is your first row. But at that point, you're still working on the front side of your work because you didn't turn it. You simply went down and made chains, and then you worked right back down that row of chains. But when you turned your work to begin your second row, that took you to the back side or the wrong side of your work. But we're now beginning row 3, so that means we're back on the right side of our work. So I am going to take a stitch marker. Again, you can use a paper clip, you can use a piece of yarn, but you just want to put it underneath one of the top parts of one of the stitches, just so you can mark that this is the top or the right side of your work. But I was going to tell you, your slip knot, when you're on the right side or the front side of your work, your slip knot is always going to be on the left side if you are a right-handed crocheter. If you are a left-handed crocheter, it will be on the right side of your work. I am a right-handed, so mine is going to be on the left side. And that is one way that I can always know the front or the right side of my project. But again, I'm going to mark it with a stitch marker, and even though I've been crocheting for 21 years, if I make a blanket or anything like that, I will always still mark it with a stitch marker because it's just helpful to remember. But once we have our dishcloth finished, we'll take a look at the stitches both front and back and try to look at how to identify them from sight if we don't use an accessory or tool to help us. So now it's time to continue making single crochets down the row for our third row. So just go ahead and continue making your single crochets, and I'll meet you at the end of row 3. Now, as you're working on this, how many rows do you need to do to complete this dishcloth? Well, I usually recommend, if you want to make a complete square dishcloth, then if you have 20 chains to create the width of your dishcloth, then you would want to match that to make it a perfect square with 20 rows in length. Well, I'm going to apologize. Length is your chains, height is your rows. I always get that backwards. So see, Craft Table Talks, I am just as much the student as the teacher. And there will be things in future Craft Table Talks that I will be learning right here with you for the very first time. So I'm excited about that. Excited to grow my own crochet journey. All right, we're now down to that very last stitch. And after this, we're going to mark it. So we'll have a stitch marker on the end. You could have done it before now, but there is so much I am bringing to your attention that I wanted to show it in a sequence. Pardon me. All right, so now I'm at the end of this row. So I want to mark that stitch so that now I will know exactly where my beginning and end stitch is for every row. And again, I'm going to count my stitches. So in this stitch, I have the stitch marker. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and in my 20th stitch, I've got this stitch marker. So we're good to go, and we're ready for row number 4. So again, chain 1 to increase the height and turn your work. And now we're ready for row number 4. I'm going to remove this stitch marker so I can work in that stitch. And if you're more comfortable, you can leave the stitch marker in to complete the stitch, and I can do that for you, and then move it. So here I've created my single crochet stitch, and now I can remove the stitch marker from row 3 and put it in this stitch to begin row 4. There we go. All right, and now I'm going to just continue making single crochets all the way down row 4. And I'll meet you at the end where we come to the next stitch marker. And as you can see, this is an even row, number 4. So this is the back side of my work, the wrong side. Over here is where my stitch marker is marking the front and the right side. So odd rows are on your right and front side, and even rows are on your back or wrong side. And here we are coming up to this final stitch, and I know that because my stitch marker is in there. Again, you can remove it before making the stitch, or you can just slide right in there and make that final stitch. And then remove your stitch marker from the previous row and put it right there in the last stitch, so it is marked. Again, want to count my stitches. I should be fine because I've got my stitch markers marking the beginning and the end stitch. However, I might have been paying attention to something else and skipped a stitch. Now you can tell when you've skipped a stitch, but let's presume that we're all new and we don't know how to tell. So let's count our stitches and make sure we've got 20. So once you get a little bit more experience, you don't have to count each one itself. You can count by twos. So here is my first 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, and my last 2 make 20. So I still have 20 stitches. That is what I want. So I am ready to move on to round 5. I'm going to chain 1 to increase my height for that row, and I'm going to turn my work. I'm going to remove my stitch marker and put a single crochet right back in there for my first single crochet for this row. And then I'm going to put my stitch marker right back in so I know exactly where that stitch is. So I make sure I don't miss it and leave it off, or put an extra stitch on the side and create an extra stitch so I have 21. So that stitch marker will keep me from doing that. And then we're just going to work row 5 just like we've done the other 4 rows, putting a single crochet in each stitch. And I will finish working this row with you, and then I am going to leave you to pause the video and work the remaining 15 rows on your own. I am confident that you have this, but if not, you can always come back and watch what we did in the first the first 5 rows. Or again, you can pause this video and go to Craft Table Talks number 6, where we go into detail on how to make the single crochet stitch. And again, I'll know when I get to that last stitch for this row because I will have a stitch marker in it. And that is my very next stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and work my single crochet right in there. And then I'm going to remove that stitch marker and move it up to the new one. Now the one thing about cotton yarn, it is a thicker yarn. So sometimes you just got to wiggle those stitch markers loose. All right, so again, let's count our stitches. We've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, and these last 2 make 20. So we're good to go. So we're going to chain 1, turn our work, and now we're ready to begin working row 6. So go ahead and complete working rows 6 through 20, and I will meet back with you when you get to the end of row 20. I am almost finished with my 20 rows. I have one stitch left here that I saved to do with you. So let's go ahead and put that final single crochet stitch in, and that's the same stitch that I have the stitch marker in. And now let's go ahead and move our stitch marker up into this stitch. And there we go. All right, so let's take a look at this really close for a moment. Let's count our rows and make sure we have 20 rows. Now, to look at this, if you're new at crochet, it might be a little bit difficult to figure out exactly how many rows you have. But as you become a little bit more seasoned, it is easier to look at. So I'm going to turn this way so you can see this a little bit easier. But if you look, you can kind of see how it's breaking down into these rows right here. Each of these rows actually is 2 rows. So if that were the case, you can easily go 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, and 20. But if you can't really see those and you're not sure what you're looking for, then the best way to find your rows is to kind of pull your work apart, and you can then begin to see them separate. And you can see that this is row 1, this is row 2, 3, there's 4, there's 5, there's 6, 7, 8, row 9, row 10, row 11, row 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and the last row is 20. Now, we are finished with this. Now we can fasten off and be done, and this is our little dishcloth, or we can put a border on it. And I am going to show you how to put a border on. So the first thing we need to do is chain 1, because even though we're going to put a border around the entire dishcloth, we still want to increase the height so we've got something to work with. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is turn my work sideways, okay? And I want to work a stitch in each row as I go down. All right, so the very first thing I'm going to do is I am going to put a single crochet stitch right here in the end of this very first row. All right, so I'm going to go right in here and make a single crochet. All right, then I'm going to go to the bottom of the next row in that space, and I'm going to make another single crochet. All right, and you want to do this evenly across. So make sure you're going into each of these rows, and when you're done, you want to make sure that you have only one single crochet per row. So let's go into this next one, and we're going to make a single crochet. We're going to go right into the next one and make a single crochet, and we're going to go right into the next one and make a single crochet, and we're going to continue doing this all the way down the row or down the side. Now let me stop and show you what this is starting to look like, and you can see that that has given it a nice little border to your dishcloth. Plus it's increasing on the width, and it will also increase on the height when we're done as well. So just continue working single crochets at the end of each row all the way down. And when we get to the last one, that's going to be our corner, and we're going to do something different there. And again, I'm just going into those little spaces that each row makes and putting a single crochet. And now I'm down to my very last one. But before I go into there, let me just show you again how nice that's creating a little border. All right, now in this last one, I kind of want to round the corner. So to do that, I am going to put 3 single crochets into this one little space or stitch. So there's 2 and now 3. And this gives this kind of a nice little rounded corner there. All right, now I want to continue. Now these stitches are going to be easier than working the side because they're technically already made. This is the stitches that we are working in our rows. But this is the bottom, this is where our foundation chain is. But still, since we worked under the top loop and left the bottom 2 loops, it's going to create these easy stitches for us. And we're just going to go into the bottom of each of those and work a single crochet all the way across. And you can see how nice and easy the hook is gliding right into each of those stitches. And again, I'm just going under those 2 loops that were left from our chain, because when we started with row 1, we went under just the top loop. And I'm just working a single crochet in each of those all the way down the row. And we're going to do the same thing in the very last stitch that we did in the last corner to make a corner stitch. All right, so just to make sure, because we don't want this to be tricky, all right, it looks like I only have 1 left, but I technically have 2 because we're going to have to wiggle into this one that the slip knot is at. That was our very first, or excuse me, that was our last. That was our first chain from the slip knot. So we're going to go in here, but this one we're going to have to work in to put our 3 stitches in. So we're just going to put our hook here and wiggle it into that chain. It's a little tight, and we're going to make 3 single crochets. That's 1 and 2 and 3. Now this is the tail from our slip knot. Now we can now work over this to fasten it into our work as we make our stitches, but I like to do mine separately because, especially with dishcloths, I like to make sure, since this is something that's going to be washed over and over, that I secure it in nice and secure so it does not come out. So I'm going to push it to the back out of the way, and I'll do that later. But now I'm going to come out of this stitch and into the next one and just make a single crochet just like I did on the other side at the end of every row, evenly across this side. And because I'm putting 3 single crochets in the last stitch to create the corner, in between each corner, regardless of how you work it, you should have 18 single crochets, and then 3 in each corner. So again, I'm just working a single crochet at the end of each row. And if you've got to pull it apart to find the end of that row, then you can do that. Pull it apart and go in that little space at the end. And just continue working all the way up. And this time we'll stop at the stitch marker, and that will be our corner. Almost there. Okay, we got one more before the stitch marker, so we'll go in there. And now we're at the stitch marker, so we're going to remove the stitch marker, and in this one that we just took the stitch marker out of, we're going to work 3, and that will give us a nice rounded corner on this one, just like that. And then just like we did on the bottom, we're going to come across, and in the top of each of these single crochets where we were doing our row after row, we're going to make a single crochet. I'm going to tighten that one up a little bit. My tension was really loose on that one. And especially being a border, I want it to have that nice snug look. And so we're just going to continue working single crochets in each of these single crochet rows that we created. And when we get to the end of this, we'll be back at the beginning where we started to create our border. And you can see what a nice little border edge that is given to this little dishcloth. Now you can certainly always make yours bigger. You can add more chains to increase the length, and you can add more rows to increase the height. All right, this is the last stitch before the stitch marker, so I'm going to take this stitch marker out. And when we started, we came down the side. We didn't do anything in that corner, but we want it to match these other rounded corners. So we're going to go right into this end stitch, and we're going to create 3 single crochets. So we have that nice rounded corner, just like we do with all the rest of them. All right. And then we're going to chain 1 to fasten off. All right. And we're going to pull out enough so we have a tail to weave in. And I've honestly pulled out more than I need to. That's a really long tail. I don't need as much, but that's okay. That'll allow me to show you how to weave in a long tail and a short tail. All right, so let's go ahead and weave in this tail. This is where we fastened off. We'll spend more time with weaving in ends and different ways to thread the yarn through the darning needle, but for this one I like to wrap mine around the hook and kind of pinch it tight and then just slide it right through the hook, just like that. Okay, now this is how I like to fasten off. I like to keep my stitches so they look natural. So in order to complete this rounded edge, because if you see, it looks like it's sticking out from the side. So it looks like I've got 1 extra stitch there, but we know I don't. So what I want to do is I want to curve that around so it naturally just folds into the dishcloth and looks like that's where it belongs, because it is. So the way I do that is I'm going to take my darning needle, and you can come either from back to front, it really doesn't matter, and just pull that through and pull it tight so that that corner just curves right down into the dishcloth. All right, and then I like to go under a couple of these just to weave it in back and forth so that holds it in and secures it. Now I'm going to turn it over, but when I turn it over, this is technically the front side of my work because here is my stitch marker to indicate that it's the front side. I always like to weave my ends in on the back side. Now with the dishcloth, it doesn't really kind of matter because, I mean, after all, you're going to be washing dishes with it. But just to stay true to myself, I'm going to weave it in on the back side, which is the wrong side. So I'm going to go under one more of these loops. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up under some of these stitches, and I'm not going all the way through when I come under these. All right, because when you flip it over, you don't see my needle. I'm only weaving under the top of these stitches on the back side. I'm going to pull my yarn through like that. And for some, they'll call that weaved in, and that's great. But I want to make sure this is really locked in and it's not going to come out after I cut it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back in this direction, because when you come one way and then you go back in the other direction, it locks and then it can't come undone. But the way you do that is go to where you came out from, the very last stitch you came out from, and instead of going back under it, because if you do that, all you're going to do is pull your yarn out. You want to come over the top of that stitch and then go back under the other stitches you came through and pull it through, and that's how it interlocks it. But if you want to just be that extra overcautious person, you can bring it back the opposite direction one more time. But again, you got to go over the top of that last stitch, otherwise you're just going to pull what you just put in back out, and then go back through a couple of those stitches and pull it through. Now it is really locked into place. It is not coming out. And at this point, you can then just cut your yarn, and there it goes. That tail disappears in your work. And we're going to do the same thing with this small tail. And again, I want it on the back side. So I'm going to take it right through one of these ends. And I don't have a lot to work with, but that's okay. You don't need a lot. And then I'm going to come slide my needle up under the tops of some of these stitches. Just like that. And then pull my needle and my yarn through. And since I don't have a lot, I may have to take just my needle, go back under those stitches, but remember you got to go over the top of this one and go back through with the needle, and then put the yarn back in the needle just like that. Make sure you got all your strands in. Cotton is made up of a multiple of strands. And then pull it back through. And I've still got enough. If I want to be over cautious, I can come back through under a couple of those stitches I've been working with. Put my yarn back in the needle and pull it back through, and I'm almost out of yarn because that was a very short tail, but that's what I have left over, and just trim that little bit. And there you go. You have your nice little small dishcloth. Now, let's talk about front and back side, right or wrong side. Now we put our stitch marker in here so we know that this is the front side or the right side. Again, a lot of this sometimes just comes down to a preference, whether you want to call it front and back, right or wrong side. Patterns will refer to it as both, so it's good to know the terminology for all of it. All right, now, so this is a good way with a stitch marker, like I said at the very beginning, to mark your work, because once you weave your tail in, you're not going to know what is front and back by using the tail because the tail's gone. But if you've got your stitch marker, you can do that. Also, it's in the way the stitches are formed. And so another thing about the stitches on the front side, they have more of a bulkier look to them. When you flip it over, the back looks kind of flat. So take a good look at the back and then now look at the front. And you can see it's got more of a texture on the front and more of a flat look, almost like a waffle, so to speak, on the back. And a lot of that comes with the fact of just learning to look at it. And when it comes to the front side, you can also see more of the chain when you're looking at the front. The chain is more visible, and on the back side it's less obvious. So as we look at the front side, you can see more of the chains worked in the stitches, where on the back side it's a little bit more invisible, and that's what gives it kind of this flat look, and that's what gives this kind of the bulkier textured look. So that is your single crochet dishcloth. I hope you enjoyed your time around the craft table today making your single crochet dishcloth. I know I enjoyed making this with you. Well, that concludes our time together today. I hope you will stick around and enjoy our table chatter. And again, I look forward to reading your comments. Be joyful, stay crafty in your own way, make your own joyful creations, and find the joy in every day. And I'll see you next time. Bye.